April 14, 1943. Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. Fleet Radio Unit Pacific. In a cramped, sweltering room filled with radio equipment and the constant chatter of Morse code, Navy cryptographers are doing what they've done every day for months, listening to the enemy searching for patterns, breaking codes that the Japanese believe are unbreakable. On this particular day, they intercept a message that makes everyone in the room stop what they're doing. It's encoded in JN-25D, the Japanese naval cipher they've been working on since before the war. But what makes this message different is the sheer number of addressees. This isn't routine traffic. This is something important. The cryptographers, including a young officer named John Paul Stevens, who will one day sit on the Supreme Court, work frantically to decrypt the message. Hours pass. The code slowly gives up its secrets. And when the translation is complete, they can hardly believe what they're reading. It's a detailed travel itinerary for Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, Commander-in-Chief of the combined fleet of the Imperial Japanese Navy, the man who planned Pearl Harbor, the architect of Japan's early victories across the Pacific, the most important naval strategist in the entire Japanese war machine. And the message tells them exactly where he'll be, exactly when he'll be there down to the minute. Yamamoto will depart Rabaul on the morning of April 18th aboard a Mitsubishi G4M Betty bomber. He'll fly to Balale Island near Bougainville to inspect Japanese air units. The message includes his precise scheduled departure time, flight path, arrival time. Everything. Known for his legendary punctuality, the Admiral is expected to land at 07:45 hours local time. The intelligence officer who first reviews the decrypted message, Commander Edwin Layton, doesn't hesitate. He grabs the paper and runs down the hallway to Admiral Chester Nimitz, Commander-in-Chief of the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Nimitz reads it carefully, then looks up at Layton and asks a simple question. Do we try to get him? It's more complicated than it sounds. Killing Yamamoto would require revealing that American cryptographers have broken Japan's naval codes. If the Japanese realize their communications are compromised, they'll change their encryption system overnight, and the Allies will lose their most valuable intelligence asset in the Pacific theater. The British, in particular, are furious when they hear about the plan. They think no single enemy commander is worth risking the code-breaking advantage. But Nimitz makes a different calculation. Yamamoto isn't just any admiral. He's irreplaceable. No other Japanese officer commands the same respect, possesses the same experience, or holds the same mystique among both military and civilian populations. Killing him would be a blow to Japanese morale, unlike anything since Midway. The message goes up the chain. From Nimitz to Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox to President Franklin Roosevelt. According to some reports, though this is disputed, Roosevelt's response is simple and direct. Get Yamamoto. The order comes back down through channels this time as a formal directive. The mission is given a code name, Operation Vengeance, and it's tasked to the one fighter squadron in the entire theater that might be able to pull it off. The man they're hunting. To understand why the Americans are willing to risk so much to kill one man, you need to understand who Isoroku Yamamoto was. Because he wasn't just an enemy commander. He was a contradiction, a paradox, a man whose own country didn't fully understand him, and whose enemies certainly didn't. Born in 1884 in Nagaoka, Japan, Yamamoto came from a samurai family that had fought on the losing side of the Boshin War during the Meiji Restoration. His birth name was Isoroku Takano. Isoroku, literally meaning 56, a reference to his father's age when he was born. In 1916, he was adopted into the Yamamoto family to carry on their name, a common practice in Japan. Yamamoto's early naval career was marked by one defining moment. In 1905, as a young ensign, he fought at the Battle of Tsushima Strait, where the Japanese Navy achieved one of the most decisive naval victories in history, annihilating the Russian Baltic Fleet. During that battle, Yamamoto was wounded by shrapnel. He lost 2 fingers on his left hand and carried abdominal scars for the rest of his life. That battle taught him what a smaller, more technologically advanced fleet could do against a larger but less prepared enemy, a lesson he would never forget. But what truly set Yamamoto apart from his peers was his time in America. From 1919 to 1921, he attended Harvard University, studying English and immersing himself in American culture. He traveled extensively across the United States, once even hitchhiking from coast to coast. He became fluent in English. He learned to play poker and bridge, becoming an avid card player. He visited oil fields in Mexico and became so knowledgeable about petroleum that American oil companies offered him jobs. Most importantly, Yamamoto saw American industrial might firsthand. He saw the factories, the infrastructure, the vast resources. He understood what most Japanese military leaders refused to acknowledge, that in a prolonged war, Japan could not possibly defeat the United States. When Japan began its aggressive expansion in Asia in the 1930s, Yamamoto was one of the few high-ranking officers who openly opposed war with America. He argued against it repeatedly. He warned his colleagues and political leaders that Japan might win victories for 6 months, maybe a year, but after that defeat was inevitable. He knew the numbers. He'd seen America's capacity for production. He understood that once the American war machine got rolling, nothing would stop it. There's a quote often attributed to Yamamoto, though its authenticity is debated, where he supposedly said, "I fear all we have done is to awaken a sleeping giant and fill him with a terrible resolve." Whether he actually said those exact words or not, the sentiment captures his strategic thinking perfectly. He knew what Pearl Harbor would mean. But when his government decided on war anyway, Yamamoto did what he believed was his duty. He was an officer in the Imperial Navy, loyal to his emperor and his country. If Japan was going to fight America, he reasoned the only chance of success was a knockout blow. At the very beginning, something so devastating that it might shock the United States into seeking an early negotiated peace. So he planned Pearl Harbor. He envisioned an aircraft carrier strike against the American fleet in Hawaii, inspired in part by Britain's successful raid on the Italian fleet at Taranto in 1940. When his own naval general staff opposed the plan as too risky, Yamamoto threatened to resign. They backed down. On December 7, 1941, his plan was executed brilliantly. 6 Japanese carriers launched 2 waves of aircraft against Pearl Harbor, catching the American Pacific Fleet completely off guard. 8 battleships were sunk or damaged, hundreds of aircraft, destroyed, over 2,400 Americans killed. It was, in purely tactical terms, an overwhelming success. But strategically, it was the worst mistake Japan ever made. Instead of shocking America into submission, Pearl Harbor unified the country like nothing else could have. The sleeping giant didn't negotiate. It geared up for total war. And Yamamoto watched it happen, knowing exactly what it meant. By April 1943, barely 16 months after Pearl Harbor, the tide had already turned. Japan had suffered a catastrophic defeat at Midway in June 1942, losing 4 fleet carriers and hundreds of experienced pilots. American industrial production was now flooding the Pacific with new ships, planes, and men. The Guadalcanal campaign had become a grinding, costly battle of attrition that Japan was slowly losing. Yamamoto knew the war was lost. He just didn't know how much time he had left to fight it. The answer, as it turned out, was 4 more days. The impossible mission. Henderson Field, Guadalcanal, April 17, 1943. Major John Mitchell, commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron, is summoned to a command dugout and told to report immediately. When he arrives, he finds himself surrounded by high-ranking officers, brass he rarely sees outside of formal inspections. Something big is happening. They brief him on the intercepted message. They tell him about Yamamoto's flight the next morning. And then they tell him what they want him to do: take a flight of P-38 Lightning fighters to the intercept point near Bougainville, locate Yamamoto's bomber in mid-air, and shoot it down. Mitchell does some quick calculations in his head. Bougainville is roughly 400 miles north of Guadalcanal as the crow flies, but they can't fly a direct route that would take them over Japanese-controlled islands, where radar stations and observation posts would spot them immediately. They'll have to fly a wide arc out over the ocean, adding distance to avoid detection. Then there's the return flight, which will be even longer if they're being pursued by Japanese fighters. All told, they're looking at about 1,000 miles round trip. The P-38 has the range for it barely if they equip every plane with external drop tanks. But there's no margin for error. They'll have maybe 10 minutes over the target area to find and engage Yamamoto's flight before they have to turn around or risk running out of fuel on the way home. Oh, and they have to time it perfectly to arrive at the exact moment Yamamoto's plane is passing through a specific point in the sky. If they're early, they'll be spotted. If they're late, they'll miss him entirely. And they have to do all this flying at wave top level 50 feet or less above the water for over 2 hours, navigating by compass airspeed and timing alone to avoid radar detection. Mitchell figures the odds of success at about 1 in 1,000, maybe less. But he doesn't say that. He just nods and starts planning. The P-38 Lightning is the only aircraft in the theater capable of even attempting this mission. A twin-engine heavy fighter designed by Lockheed, it's fast capable of 400 miles per hour and heavily armed with 4 50-caliber machine guns and a 20mm cannon, all mounted in the nose. Its twin-boom design gives it a distinctive, almost futuristic appearance. And most importantly, with drop tanks, it has the range they need. Mitchell selects 18 P-38s for the mission, 16 for the actual attack, plus 2 spares in case of mechanical failures. He divides them into 2 groups. 4 planes, the killer flight, led by Captain Thomas Lanphier, Jr., will go after Yamamoto's bombers. The other 12, led by Mitchell himself, will fly high cover to intercept Japanese fighter escorts. The pilots selected for the killer flight are Rex Barber, Thomas Lanphier, Jim McClanahan, and Joe Moore, all experienced, all good shots, all men. Mitchell trusts to keep their heads in the chaos of combat. The briefing is detailed and precise. Mitchell plots out 5 separate course legs, each with specific headings, speeds, and durations. There will be complete radio silence from takeoff. To the moment of interception, 1 transmission could give away their position. They'll navigate by dead reckoning alone, trusting Mitchell's calculations and their own discipline to get them to the right place at the right time. They're told they'll be intercepting a high-ranking Japanese officer. Most of the pilots aren't told exactly who. The fewer people who know the target, the less chance of the information leaking. Some of them suspect it might be someone important. None of them dare hope it's Yamamoto himself. The mission is scheduled for 7:25 a.m. on April 18th, exactly 1 year to the day after the Doolittle raid on Tokyo, a bit of poetic timing that doesn't go unnoticed. The flight. April 18th, 1943. 7:25 a.m. 18. P-38 Lightnings take off from Henderson Field and form up over Guadalcanal. Major Mitchell leads them out over the Coral Sea, heading northwest on the first leg of their journey. As promised, there's complete radio silence. The only sounds are the roar of 36 engines and the rush of wind over metal. They drop to wave-top level so low that some pilots later report counting sharks in the water below them. The heat is oppressive. Inside the cockpits, temperatures soar. There's no relief, no way to cool down. Some pilots later admit they dozed off briefly during the long, monotonous flight, jolted awake by turbulence or an internal alarm bell, warning them they're drifting off course. Mitchell flies the 5 legs exactly as planned, checking his watch and compass, constantly making tiny corrections to keep them on course. 2 of the planes develop mechanical problems and have to turn back. The 2 designated spares immediately move up to take their positions. They keep flying. 2 hours and 5 minutes into the flight, they make their final turn toward Bougainville and begin climbing to gain altitude. They're approaching the intercept point. According to Mitchell's calculations, if everything has gone perfectly, they should be arriving at almost the exact moment Yamamoto's flight is passing through this airspace. Then First Lieutenant Douglas Canning, call sign Old Eagle Eyes, breaks radio silence with a subdued but urgent message. Bogies 11 o'clock high. Mitchell looks up and can barely believe what he's seeing. Right there, exactly where they're supposed to be, exactly when they're supposed to be, there are 2 Mitsubishi G4M Betty bombers, escorted by 6 Zero fighters. The odds of 1,000 gamble has just paid off. The engagement. Everything happens very fast now. Mitchell's cover flight immediately drops their external fuel tanks and begins climbing hard to engage the Zero escorts. The killer flight Lanfear, Barber, McClanahan, and Moore drops their tanks and goes after the bombers. But there's an immediate problem. They were expecting 1 Betty bomber. There are 2. Which one is carrying Yamamoto? The Japanese, meanwhile, have spotted the P-38s. The Zero escorts break formation and dive toward the attacking Americans. The 2 Betty bombers take evasive action, one diving for the jungle, the other heading for the open water. In the chaos of the dogfight, McClanahan and Moore have trouble dropping their external tanks. By the time they get them off, they're too far behind. It's going to be up to Lanfear and Barber. Lanfear turns to engage the diving Zeros, firing head-on in a climbing attack. Barber goes after the bombers. Rex Barber flying his borrowed P-38. Miss Virginia locks onto the first Betty as it dives toward the jungle canopy. He's directly behind it now, closing fast. The range drops 500 yards, 400, 300. At 200 yards, Barber opens fire. The 50 caliber bullets and 20 millimeter shells tear into the Betty's right engine and fuselage. Black smoke begins pouring out. The bomber's wing catches fire. It rolls violently to the left, and Barber has to bank hard to avoid a mid-air collision. Behind him, he sees the Betty crash into the jungle in a massive fireball. He doesn't know it yet, but he's just killed Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Barber immediately looks for the second Betty. He spots it low over the water near Moila Point, trying to escape. He dives on it and opens fire again. This bomber, carrying Yamamoto's Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Matome Ugaki, takes multiple hits. The pilot loses control. The Betty slams into the ocean at full speed. The entire engagement from first contact to the last bomber going down takes less than 3 minutes. Meanwhile, Mitchell's cover flight is tangling with the Japanese Zeros above. In the swirling dogfight, one P-38 piloted by Lieutenant Raymond Hine goes down. It's the only American loss of the mission. With both bombers down and Japanese fighters still in the area, Mitchell gives the order to disengage and head for home. The P-38s turn south and race back toward Guadalcanal, flying low again to avoid pursuit. Their fuel gauges are dropping toward empty. Some of the planes are so low on fuel when they finally reach Henderson Field that their engines quit on the runway. But they made it. 16 P-38s went out, 15 came back. And somewhere in the jungle of Bougainville, the architect of Pearl Harbor lies dead in the wreckage of his bomber. The discovery. The next day, April 19th, a Japanese search party hacks through the dense jungle near Bougainville, following the smoke trail from the crashed bomber. When they finally reach the wreckage, they find a scene of complete devastation. The Betty has disintegrated on impact, scattering debris across a wide area. But one thing is eerily intact. About 50 feet from the main wreckage, still strapped into his seat, which has been thrown clear of the fuselage, sits Admiral Yamamoto. He's in full dress uniform. His white-gloved hand still grips his samurai sword. By all accounts, he looks dignified, peaceful, almost as if he's simply sleeping. An autopsy reveals that he died instantly, long before. The plane hit the ground. 2 bullets hit him, one through his left shoulder, the other entering his lower jaw and exiting through his right eye. Either wound would have been fatal. He never knew the plane was crashing. The rescue party recovers his body and flies it back to Rabaul. The news spreads through the Japanese command structure like a shockwave. Yamamoto is dead. The greatest admiral in the Imperial Navy, the man who led them to victory after victory in the war's early months, is gone. On May 21, 1943, more than a month after his death, the Japanese government finally makes a public announcement. The delay is strategic. They don't want to admit how devastating this loss is, don't want to give the Americans the satisfaction of knowing they've struck such a blow. When the announcement finally comes, it simply states that Admiral Yamamoto died while directing general strategy on the front line. The entire nation goes into mourning. Yamamoto is given a state funeral in Tokyo with thousands of mourners lining the streets. His ashes are divided, some interred at Tama Cemetery, some buried in his hometown of Nagaoka. He's posthumously promoted to Fleet Admiral, the highest rank in the Navy. Meanwhile, the Americans face their own dilemma. They desperately want to announce this victory to let the American people know that the mastermind of Pearl Harbor has been killed. But doing so risks revealing that they've broken Japan's codes. The solution is a cover story. American officials claim that civilian coast watchers in the Solomon Islands observed Yamamoto boarding a bomber and radioed the information to nearby naval forces, who then scrambled fighters to intercept him. It's plausible enough. The Japanese never entirely believe it. They suspect American code breaking, but they can't be certain. They don't change their naval cipher. The intelligence advantage remains intact. In the United States, news of Yamamoto's death makes headlines, though without full details. For many Americans, there's a grim satisfaction in it. The man who planned Pearl Harbor has been hunted down and killed. It feels like justice. The aftermath. The question that historians still debate is this: did killing Yamamoto actually change the outcome of the war? On one hand, by April 1943, Japan had already lost the strategic initiative. The tide had turned at Midway. American industrial production was overwhelming Japanese capacity. The outcome of the war was in many ways already decided. Some historians argue that removing Yamamoto simply accelerated what was inevitable. But others point to the psychological impact. Yamamoto wasn't just a naval commander, he was a symbol. He represented Japanese naval excellence, the living embodiment of the victories at Pearl Harbor and across the Pacific. His death was a devastating blow to Japanese morale, particularly within the Navy. More importantly, there was no one of equivalent stature to replace him. Other Japanese admirals were competent, but none commanded the same respect, possessed the same strategic vision, or inspired the same confidence among their men. After Yamamoto's death, Japanese naval operations became more cautious, more defensive, less coordinated. Some historians credit Operation Vengeance as one of the most successful targeted killing operations in military history. The intelligence gathering, the planning, the execution, everything came together with a precision that was almost miraculous. The fact that Mitchell's calculations put those P-38s in exactly the right place at exactly the right time after a 2-hour flight over empty ocean is a testament to both skill and extraordinary luck. For the pilots who flew the mission, the aftermath was complicated. Thomas Lanphier claimed credit for shooting down Yamamoto's plane, and his account was initially accepted. He became a celebrity, gave interviews, received the Navy Cross. But Rex Barber always maintained that he was the one who shot down the first Betty, and his account was supported by other pilots who witnessed the engagement. Decades later, after extensive analysis of flight records, Japanese eyewitness accounts and wreckage examination, most historians now conclude that Barber was indeed the one who killed Yamamoto. The angle of attack, the damage to the wreckage, the position of the planes, everything points to Barber's P-38 delivering the fatal shots. But Lanphier went to his grave, insisting he'd made the kill. The controversy became bitter and personal, souring relationships between the surviving pilots. It's an unfortunate coda to one of the war's most remarkable missions. The legacy. Today, the wreckage of Yamamoto's bomber still lies in the jungle of Bougainville, a twisted memorial to one of World War II's pivotal moments. The tail section is still recognizable, overgrown with vegetation, but intact enough that the Japanese markings are visible. Admiral Yamamoto remains a controversial figure, especially in Japan. To Americans, he's the villain who planned Pearl Harbor, the enemy mastermind who had to be stopped. But in Japan, his legacy is more complex. He was a man who opposed the war but fought it brilliantly when ordered to do so. A strategist who understood his nation's weaknesses but couldn't prevent his government from making catastrophic decisions. A commander who won stunning victories but predicted ultimate defeat. There's something almost Shakespearean about Yamamoto's story. The tragic hero who sees the disaster coming and cannot stop it, who fights with everything he has for a cause he knows is doomed. Operation Vengeance stands as a reminder of how intelligence wins wars. The ability to read enemy communications to know what they're planning before they do it to position forces with surgical precision, these advantages proved decisive throughout the Pacific War. Yamamoto's death was just the most dramatic example. It's also a story about the incredible capabilities of the P-38 Lightning and the pilots who flew them. A 1,000-mile mission over enemy-controlled waters, navigating by dead reckoning, arriving at the intercept point within seconds of the predicted time, it was an almost superhuman feat of airmanship. And perhaps most of all, it's a story about choices and their consequences. Yamamoto chose to fly on that particular morning because he believed in being visible to his troops in leading from the front. He chose to stick to a predictable schedule because punctuality was part of his character. He chose to fly with only a small escort because he believed American fighters couldn't reach that far north. Each choice, seemingly small in isolation, combined to put him in exactly the wrong place at exactly the wrong time. Major John Mitchell, calculating flight paths on Guadalcanal, chose to trust his navigation skills and his pilot's discipline. The cryptographers at Pearl Harbor chose to spend hours decoding a message that might have been routine. President Roosevelt, if the story is true, chose to risk the code-breaking secret for the chance to kill one man. On April 18, 1943, all those choices converged over Bougainville. 16 P-38 Lightnings intercepted 2 Betty bombers. In less than 3 minutes of combat, one of the most important figures in the Pacific War was dead. The war continued for more than 2 more years after Yamamoto's death. Millions more would die. Cities would burn. Atomic bombs would fall. But something fundamental changed that morning over Bougainville. Japan lost more than an admiral that day. It lost its greatest naval mind, its most charismatic leader, its symbol of invincibility. And though the Japanese military machine fought on with desperate courage, it fought without the one man who had truly understood what they were up against. In the end, Yamamoto's own prediction came true. Japan won victories for 6 months, maybe a year, and after that, as he'd warned, his government defeat became inevitable. He just didn't live to see it.